an alcoholic. Welcome to the Sunday morning Never Too Early Big Book Workshop. With those who care to, please join me in a moment of silence to remind us why we're here for the alcoholic or addict who still suffers. Would you please join me in the serenity prayer? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Okay, we of Alcoholics Anonymous. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100, this is the first printing of the first edition of the Big Book, as it was printed in 1939. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we've recovered is the main purpose of this book. For them, we hope these pages will prove so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. We think that this account of our experiences will help everyone to better understand the sick person. And besides, we're sure that our way of living has its advantages for all. It is the purpose of this workshop to experience the recovery process, either to experience the recovery process as outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, either for the first time or again, so that we may better carry out and understand our primary purpose, which is to stay sober and carry the message to the still suffering alcoholic. We do as the Big Book suggests, as a group in a 1.5 hour meeting, followed by a 15-minute group content. We have a different reader each week whose responsibility is to keep us on track with what is being read. The reader will pause at each paragraph for comments, questions, problems, or experience with what has just been read. We are here to talk about recovery only and to go through the 12-step processes outlined in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is not an emotional or an intellectual exercise. This is a spiritual exercise so that we can all recover and experience the recovery process as we read it together. Crosstalk is allowed in a loving and supportive manner. Please try to relate your experiences only with your questions or comments. Please repeat after me. Please, God, help us set aside everything we think we know about ourselves, our disease, this process, and you, God, for an open mind and a new experience. Amen.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ronald White, and I'm an alcoholic. I want to welcome you to the Never Too Early Big Book Workshop. I will be steering the ship this morning. My brother, my partner in crime, Ralph, is in Akron, Ohio. He was the closing speaker at Founders Day this morning. And there was a long line of people, I think I was told, that were thanking him for speaking this morning. And so he sent us a message that when that's all over, he's going to try to rush to a machine somewhere where he can try to log on. So he may or may not be joining us midstream. But until then, you're in my trusty hands. So for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I want to welcome you. This is the third installment of this time around of our Never Too Early Big Book Workshop. As my brother Reggie just read, this is not a traditional meeting. This is a workshop. We encompass any fellowship that uses the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous as their program of recovery. So any and all are welcome. So you may hear all types of different experiences shared as they relate to an individual's illness, the thing that has brought them here for recovery. All are welcome in that regard. Not being a traditional meeting, we don't have general sharing. What we ask people to do is only share on the paragraph that was just read and perhaps something that may have preceded it that connects with it. And so my job is to make sure that we keep the discussion centered on that. So I may play the bad guy, as it were, occasionally to try to draw the discussion back. And so if I have to cut you off if you're sharing or if you're sharing a little too long, because we have upwards, last week we had over 500 people here. So we got a lot of people and we may have a number of hands that want to share. And so if you're going to share, you may not be able to share twice at this meeting because of the number. So pick carefully what you look at what's coming up. and if you see something that's coming up that you know you're going to want to share on, that you're going to relate to, pick that time. When we say no more hands, please don't let us be the back. Don't make me have to lower your hand. If we say no more hands, that means no more hands on that particular paragraph. We celebrate sober birthdays, sober anniversaries, annual milestones only. We have too many people to do day counting and months, so we only share years. If you're celebrating a birthday that occurred today or within the last week, send a message to Ryan in the chat, denoting the number of years you're celebrating. In the last 15 minutes of our meeting, we devote that to the celebrations, to the sober birthdays. So when the reading is over, the meeting is not over. Birthdays are a critical part of the meeting where we celebrate each other. And you'll want people to be here when you celebrate. So please, don't go nowhere. And we have a beautiful meditation that ends the meeting that our member Zena always comes up with before we do a closing prayer. So please stay all the way through. So I think I've covered everything for right now. Ryan, if you would, can you direct us to where we left off? I think it's in the forward to the second edition, page XVII, if I'm correct. And it's the first full paragraph, hence the two men. Am I correct, Ryan?
That's right. And for all you book historians, if you're confused by the Roman numerals, you may have a different edition. So don't hold us too tightly to that.
So just know we're in the forward to the second edition, the third page in the forward to the second edition. First full paragraph, hence the two men. Who's our reader today?
Jerry Miller. My name is Jerry Miller, and I'll be alcoholic.
Don't mess up no words today. Go ahead, Jim.
Hence, the two men set to work almost frantically upon alcoholics arriving in the ward of Akron City Hospital. Their first case, a desperate one, recovered immediately and became AA number 3. He never had another drink. This work at Akron continued through the summer of 1935. There were many failures, but there was an occasional heartening success. When the broker returned to New York in the fall of 1935, the first AA group had actually been formed, though no one realized it at the time.
All right, so just recapping, last week we read about how the New York broker, Bill Wilson, had gone to Akron, Ohio for a business trip. He was 6 months sober at the time. Business deal fell apart. He wanted to drink and he had to find someone to talk to, alcoholic to talk to, so he would not drink. Through a series of divine connections, he connected with a physician, a proctologist named Dr. Bob Smith, who lived in Akron, who was a member of the same Oxford movement that Bill Wilson was a member of in New York. But Dr. Bob had been, even though Bill had gotten sober in the Oxford group, Dr. Bob had been unable to get sober in the Oxford group. But when Bill Wilson connected with him, shared with him the nature of the disease, told him the medical things that Dr. Silkworth gave him, and Dr. Bob, being a medical person, understood immediately. Once having been told it in that fashion, he attacked it in the spiritual remedy in a whole different fashion and recovered. So that's where we left off last week where it talked about this seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another like nobody else could, and strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. So that led into what we just read this week, which Kent's, the two men almost frantically worked upon alcoholics. They went to Dr. Bob's hospital to find a drunk that they could talk to, just like Bill had talked to Dr. Bob. And the one that they found who became AA number 3 was a lawyer, an attorney named Bill Dotson. Bill Dotson was there in Akron, Ohio, in the hospital. And his story, you will see if you read the chapter, A Vision for You, they give details on that meeting about how Bill and Bob met Bill Dotson and how he recovered. He became AA number 3. And so they said, so Bill stayed in Akron for the rest of the summer. Remember, he got there on Mother's Day. It was when he first tried to make the connection in May. Dr. Bob has his final sobriety date after a relapse in June, hence Founders Day. I think June 10th or June 11th is commemorated as Founders Day. And so Bill stays all the way through the rest of the summer, and they were mostly they were failures when they work with people. Almost like it was very, very difficult at the time. But as I said, occasional heartening success. So when he left to come back to New York, they had the beginnings of the first AA group in Akron, Ohio. They didn't know that because remember, there is no AA at the time. They didn't call it an AA group. They were in the Oxford groups at the time. See, this is in hindsight that they're telling us. They didn't know at the time that this is what was going to become Alcoholics Anonymous. And this was the group that they were formed. No hands? Jerry Miller?
Yeah, okay. A second small group promptly took shape in New York, to be followed in 1937 with the start of a third at Cleveland. Besides these, there were scattered alcoholics who had picked up the basic idea in Akron or New York and were trying to form groups in other cities. By late 1937, the number of members having substantial sobriety time behind them was sufficient to convince the membership that a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic.
All right. So
morning,
Bill,
everybody.
Oh, there he is.
He made it.
There he is. Congratulations. We heard that you saved some souls this morning in Akron, Ohio. So I'll move aside right now. But it's good to see you, brother.
The reading is particularly telling this morning for me because I'm sitting where much of this took place, you guys. And so tomorrow is the actual birthday of Alcoholics Anonymous, June 10th. So Bill was, like Ronnie said, Bill was in Akron after he got with Dr. Bob. He stayed for a while. And so he stayed, and he and Dr. Bob. So that was, remember, he showed up in Akron in May. And so now he stayed until the fall. So he stayed some months there. And so it's interesting because Wednesday night here in Akron, they have a meeting at, and it's group 1, you know, and so that meeting is at the King School, and it's group 1, and it still meets. A lot of people were there this past Wednesday from out of town to commemorate. So when Bill went back to New York, he formed the second group in New York. And in 1937, Clarence Snyder and his crew started a group in Cleveland. A lot of the Clevelanders, as I'm even learning more here, like to take credit and were salty for not, that's just a side note, don't just background, for not being credited with actually being the first AA group, because they split away from the Oxford group first. But anyway, second small group was in New York and Cleveland a third. Then they were trying to spread it out to some other cities. By late 1937, number of members having substantial sobriety time. So in 1937, Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob sat around and they were meeting, and they had what's known as the Counting Noses meeting. So it's so interesting when I look at 473 people, 474 in these squares right now, the mushrooming. And back then, the whole fellowship. So they sat down and they knew who the membership was. They knew how many. And so they started saying, who do we have here in Akron? And they wrote them down. Who do we have in New York? And they wrote them down. Who do we have in Cleveland? And they wrote them down. And the substantial sobriety time was some months, any people. And so certainly not years. Probably a handful had a couple of years. Bill only had a couple of years, and Dr. Bob. So they counted up to 40 people, you guys. And they said, dang, we think we've hit upon something. We think we have something that might be real. You know how you have an idea and you run with it, you might be starting a business, you might be doing a number of things, starting your own conference, but they ran upon something and they were hoping, they were really hoping. Didn't have a book yet, nothing like that. Just going out looking for drunks. And so they said, shit, it's 40 people staying sober. We may have stumbled upon this something. And it got real. I say it got real for them right then. And so they said, now it's time. There was sufficient time to convince the membership that a new light. So now we're going to stop talking about this like it's an idea. Up until that time, we would like to be thinking, we know because we got hindsight. But they had a lot of people in and out, slipping, heartbreaks, say I want to do it next week drunk. They had a lot more of that than they had stick and stay. But they counted 40. And that was that number was the number that led to what's going to happen in the next paragraphs. Heather?
We owe a lot of this to Lois because of the fact that if she would not have been so unselfish and pointing out to him that at least he was being sober in New York, and to allow her husband to go away for 6 months plus, to not bitch and moan and say, honey, it's time for you to come home. She was just the backbone of this organization. We owe her so much. So that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you for letting me share.
She and Ann Smith were critical. Larry?
Larry, alcoholic and addict, and I love the forward to the second edition because I've lived it up close and personal. The book says further authentication became necessary for me. When I first got here, I like that I uses words like strenuous and frantic. And it says the physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. I went and got hands laid on me from everybody to TD Jakes to Benny Hins, and I fell down, did the funky chicken, got up, and I got loaded. And I came into the room, and y'all gave me the information. Y'all explained me the grave nature of alcoholism and Dr. Silkworth's description of the alcoholic. I found out I had the allergy, and I found out that I had the obsession, and further authentication became necessary for me. I refused to do. I started off real good, but somewhere along the line, I started resting on my laurel. And I started off strenuous and I started off frantic, but what happened was I started getting lazy, spiritually lazy, and I got loaded, and I didn't make it back into the room from that was in 2002, and I didn't make it back until July the 5th, 2008. And when I came back up here, when I finally was able to crawl back up here, because I found out that I'm not like most alcoholics, I wanted to stop and I found that I could not. And so I endured that ass whooping for 6 years. And when I finally made it back up in here, I knew what strenuous was and I knew what frantic was. And I knew that that was vital to my recovery. And I began to do this thing with a willingness that before I was unable to muster. And I'd like to believe that from that day to this, that God has allowed me to be a new light in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's all I got, Ralph. Thank you for letting me share. And you awful sharp there, buddy.
Thank you, sir. Larry stood in as a surrogate for all y'all that's going to try to start sharing your recovery in this history section. And he was so clever, he was able to weave all them other steps and the doctor's opinion, which we ain't read, all that in. So he got it in. He's the surrogate. Y'all ain't sharing your stories right now. So I'm giving you a warning. Jerry?
Jerry Alcoholic, I just got a question, right? That one line there, they said that the members having substantial sobriety time was sufficient to convince the membership of New Light had entered the dark world of alcoholic. What was sufficient sobriety time back then?
Couple of months, if a couple. Some of the members that they had probably had 30 days. But certainly everybody, Bill Wilson got sober in December 34. This is 37, right? So he didn't have 3 years. He had 2. Dr. Bob got sober in 35. He was coming up on 2. Bill Dodson was a little bit after that. So Bill Dodson, maybe Fritz and the Stanley, maybe a couple. I doubt if maybe more than 2 handful had a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's an excellent question, Jerry. Might get some more reason, but I would say only a couple of handful had a year. The rest were months. But here's the thing, because I'm sitting here with 37 years. We got people all on here with years and years and years. So I don't know why we got all these hands with this little bit of stuff we read, but I'm going to give y'all a short leash. We got all these years, but think about it. Being new and not having any, they didn't have any Alcoholics Anonymous. Can you imagine what 60 days look like? Remember when 60 days look like a long ass time? So you got a bunch of drunks that had not been able to be sober, had been writing pledges and doing that, could not get a week, could not get. And so now when they did the count noses, they were looking and saying, we got people that's been probably 4 weeks, 5 weeks. That's a long ass time, relatively speaking. For us, y'all don't know, but then no book, no fellowship, just them, no big fellowship. So that was excellent question, Jerry. Substantial sobriety time in here was not what we call substantial sobriety time now.
Thanks, Ralph.
Jill?
Good morning, never too early. My name is Jill. I'm an alcoholic, and the line that gets me in this, what we just read, that is so impactful, is that by late 37, the number of members have substantial time, which they, like we just talked about, was not that much. But what's telling for me is that it was sufficient that the membership, that a new light had entered into the dark world of the alcoholic, that the hopelessness that you were doomed to die, because there was this magic that occurred, or this synergism that occurred between Bill knowing, I got to go talk to somebody, and Bob, and it talks about them frantically in the paragraph before there, getting out. They found the secret. The secret is in the line right above that, it's vital. It's vital to permanent sobriety that we're talking from one alcoholic to another and carrying the message. The primary purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous is described right there. It just touches my heart so deeply. Good to see you guys.
Arvis? You're muted. Arvis, you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Arvis. I'm an alcoholic, been sober since 91. It's interesting where, of course, there was no big book whatsoever. And we hear, of course, a lot of times we talk about, let's share about recovery. But of course, it seems like back in those days, they were basically sharing their disease because that's all they had to talk about. And it's kind of interesting, basically, is since there was no 12 steps, okay, a lot of people were just sharing, I would think, their experience drinking and how, of course, being together, they're staying drinking. So I think God, our higher power itself, was really the thing that actually the glue that held us together because there was no group. So a lot of them were possibly talking about their experience drinking. That's all I have to say.
Reader?
It was now time the struggling groups thought to place their message and unique experience before the world. This determination bore fruit in the spring of 1939 by the publication of this volume. The membership had then reached about 100 men and women. The fledgling society, which had been nameless, now began to be called Alcoholics Anonymous, from the title of its own book. The flying blind period ended and AA entered a new phase of its pioneering times.
T? No, before you go, T, let me hear from David. David?
I'm David. I'm an alcoholic. Sober since August of '79. I was just reading this, listening to this talk about Dr. Bob before he got sober, where he was going to the Akron meetings and all this wonderful detail. If anybody wants to talk, because I don't have a long amount of time to talk, please send me your text message and I can pass that on to you. We can sit around and address the question of, we can imagine what it is to be a fly on the wall, but we really don't know it until this message is passed on to us specifically using the message. And many of the message is distorted by our imagination, and we gotta look at it in real facts. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa?
Teresa alcohol. You spiffy founders that you at the Mecca. What a spiritual experience. I was torn because I know what this double dipping, not sharing. I'm like, double dipping is if I share about the same paragraph again. So how am I gonna work this out? Because I may have something to say about a different paragraph. So I was
you
trying
share
to
as much as you want.
Okay, I was trying to figure out where am I gonna share. So I'm gonna try to encapsulate all of it. I think we're in our anniversary. Here is where, have you ever been to Dr. Bob's house? I like when Kent does it, but I've stayed in that living. This is what this is happening here. When I read this, if everybody's new, it's kind of like every time I come to this, I'm like, what does that have to do with me? Is this good reading? Is that interesting information? Is this important to me? Does this matter? And I go, I think it does. Because if this didn't happen, I wouldn't have this available to me. And that these folks, I like that moment. I think you've shared it too sometimes, Ralph. In that moment, they're in this living room. They're finding that not being put in straitjackets anymore, doctors not knowing what to do with them, being in jails, mothers and children's confused and lost. I mean, hell, Ann and Lois, they go in the Oxford Group Church asking somebody, help us, please. We don't know what to do with these people. These guys get together, have no clue. Something happens in this conversation, and then they go and they do it with somebody else. Like, I can only imagine. They say it's divinely inspired. I'm not sure. What I do know is if I reflect on where I am now and what you're telling me happened then, that they were mindful and considerate enough to say something is happening. Some change is taking place, and I make it personal to me that they stood, whether it's that living room and that room, and they said, I still get emotional. How are we going to tell Teresa? Because we may be gone by the time Teresa get here. How are we going to tell Ralph? So Ralph could do a big book study and break it down. You know what I mean? Like, how are we going to do this? How are we going to tell people in Akron and in Hawaii? I don't know. We're getting letters. It's coming from all over the world. People like, how we do this? How we do this? How are we going to do this? People not even born yet. They don't even know about us. You know what we can do? We could put it in a book. We can put it in a book, just explaining what our experience is and what we've done so far. I don't get up in the semantics of 2 months, 3 months. Man, hell, one day was astonishing to me when I had one day. I was like, one day? 24 hours? What? You know what I'm saying? Okay, they had a year, 2 years, 30 days. I can't imagine. I can only imagine with me having 2 days, 1 day, 3 days. I remember, I don't know about none of y'all, when I first started getting sober, I wanted to run to New York and tell everybody. You know what I mean? I wanted to tell everybody, look what I wanted. Bill did that. He went to bars, right? Look what we do. They were throwing him out. How we put it in a book. We're coming out of those dark days, and it says the flying blind period ended. Flying blind. They were like, ooh, what we doing? And entered into a new phase of its pioneering time. Thank you, God, that allows us all to be here, 500 people. How many people are at Akron? I was there last year, man. Thousands, 10,000 people. Thank you to everybody. Bill, Bob, and Lois, the 100, the one guy who said yes, Dr. Bob, the nun, jeez. It still strikes me, and if you're new, is that important to you? I don't know, but it remains important to me. To this day, oof, it just moves me. I'm grateful. I'm grateful that they thought of that. If not, they would have just had something that they experienced and we wouldn't have known nothing about it. Thank you.
Thank you, T. Chris?
Hey, buddy, I'm Chris. I'm an alcoholic. Sober date, July 29th, 81. Thank you so much. But, I'm really pretty much, Teresa pretty much hit on I'm just thinking, thank God they wrote it down. Because we don't have to be the fly on the wall. We get to find out precisely what they actually did because they wrote it down. We'll get the benefit. I'll pass it on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Carl?
Carl Bennett, alcoholic. It's so funny. In the first word, it says, we are more than 100 men and women. In the second forward, it says, we are about 100. And the first forward is the first lie in Alcoholics Anonymous. This is what I've been taught. I've been sober since June 20th, 1986. And it's really funny. I go to meetings on the West Side, and it's really funny that is the first lie. And it's proved in the second forward. And I always thought that was hysterical. And, just one of those odd things in Alcoholics Anonymous. And they were trying to prove a point when they said that, and I totally get it, why they did it, and I heartily agree. It kept me here, so thank you for letting me share.
Marge?
Thank you. My name is Marge Banks, and I am an alcoholic. I think that the whole purpose of those men was to share the love that they had found with each other and the love that brought AA together. AA means love. And like, a good friend down in New York says, Jeffrey says, love is love. And that's what AA is. Love is love. Thank you for letting me share.
Pamela?
Good morning, never too early. I am Pamela, and I'm an alcoholic. And somebody said something that just struck with me. In the last paragraph, it says, a new light had entered the dark world of the alcoholic. This is what my book looks like, and it was brand new when I came here to Never Too Early. I had somebody mail it to me in California. So, and most of the stuff written in here is stuff that you've said over the past 2 cycles. And I remember, I think it was Ronnie who said, are we the light? And that's the first promise. That's a promise. Because the dark world of the alcoholic, they used to jail us and put us in institutions, and we died in sanitariums. So there was now a new solution that had never been heard of before. And then I believe it was Ralph last year said they placed their message, their program, and unique experience, their connection with other people. And they had determination. See, I got to be determined to do this thing. I got to show up when I don't want to. I got to sponsor when I don't want to. Like right there, I got to answer the phone when I don't want to. It was the determination to show this volume. This volume, and I love what Ralph says all the time, this is the treasure map. It's not the treasure. But I need a map to get to the damn treasure. So I show up here. So you all could show me the message that's entailed inside this book. And guess what? The first 100 men and women, they say they stretched on that, but first 100, they found a way out. And guess what they did? They made this book so I could too find a way out. And guess what? AA entered a new phase of pioneering time. See, we pioneering. For every one of us sitting in here, there's 50 out there stuck. There's 75 out there that ain't never gonna make it here and don't know nothing about it. And there's somebody dying right now from untreated alcoholism. Yeah, I'm an alcoholic. Don't get it twisted. I smoked a lot of crack, but I'm still need this solution because I've tried a whole bunch of other stuff that just didn't work. I got them 10 commandments. It took me to 12 steps, like Donna Ruth said, to be able to even think about keeping them. So this book, I'm very particular about. This book, this volume is a lifesaver, a game changer, and a magic miracle maker. So thank you for conducting the workshop. Thank you for continuing to show me a new truth every time I go through this book. And thank you for letting me share.
Ronnie?
Yeah, Ronald White, alcoholic. My Wi-Fi keeps going out and I get on different devices. When we were first led through this book, one of the things, and I have to remember how it was when I was coming through the book for the first time, because I want to remember the experience that our people in our recovery in God's property or Alaska Addiction Rehabilitation might be thinking as they go through the book. And people, they breathed life into the book for us. They made it come alive by giving us the history behind the book, letting me know that these weren't just saints and pious people that put this book together. They were drunks just like me, just like us. And they were people who were fallible. They were people who were ambitious, who tried things, who tried a lot of big things. One of the things behind this book, in addition to spreading the message, being able to get out the message in a coherent fashion about what this recipe was that they had found, was that they wanted to raise money. They're very practical too, and they wanted to raise money so that they could fund alcoholic hospitals, that they could have missionaries they could pay to find alcoholics to come to the hospital so they'd have people that they could talk to, because they knew they needed to find drunks to help so that they could stay sober and they could help the drunks too. And all of these ambitious ideas, and there's a lot of literature through the traditions and other things that show why these kinds of ambitions may not have been the best idea and really fell by the wayside, but we ended up with this. We ended up with this book as a result of it, and that's why a lot of times we say that the program is God inspired, because despite the intentions of certain people with different things, it all comes out the way it's supposed to come out. When it talked about the fledgling society, I don't know if Gloria or whoever's our dictionary person put in with this new society, like a new bird, right? That's just trying to grow up and spread its wings. And I'm going to as we go through this, we'll go through different stages of this infancy, and when we get to the adolescent stage. But all of this flying blind period, like they talked about, with no radar, with no directions, with nobody before them to chart the way, this book began to be the map. And I'm grateful for it. That's enough for me.
So now we have a group. So we have the Akron physician and the book stockbroker, Bill Wilson, Dr. Bob. They go call on Bill Dotson. He stays sober. They start hollering at drunks, and pretty soon the Bill goes back home after some months, because he stayed in Akron, you guys, for a number of months after he and Dr. Bob had their meet, and Dr. Bob got sober. So he goes back, and when he goes back, there was already a group in the Oxford group. There was already a group in Akron. He goes back to New York, forms a group in the Oxford group in New York, and then by the time this gets to, now they have a group in Cleveland. They do the Counting Noses meeting in 1937, and they say, wow, it's about 40 drunks staying sober. Bill Wilson says, he gets excited. He's an excitable guy. This is what we need to do. Teresa was mentioning how they're going to let us, 500 plus people here in 2024, how are we going to develop something that can get to these folks? Really, what they were just talking about was how we going to get it out to the drunks of our day. And I'm like, I like to think that it was like, wow, and for posterity, but how are we going to get this message out? Bill, ambitious, says, check this out. Why don't we set up a string of hospitals? The place we getting them at now, we go into hospitals looking for them. Why don't we set up a string of hospitals just for that? We have things these days we call detoxes, and treatment facilities. Why don't we set up a string of hospitals? In addition, why don't we get a bunch of missionaries, go out, in a way, the equivalent on this spiritual side of account execs, but really more like, no, we ain't account execs. All religions have missionaries and evangelicals. And so they were thinking of that model. People going out, preaching the word, if you were, so to speak. And the third thing, let's do a book. Well, the other two ideas were pretty ambitious. The missionary idea and the hospitals. Got to build the hospitals, get the people. Ain't but 40 of us right now. And this whole missionary thing, ain't but 40 of us right now. So those are they need funding. The book. That's how we'll fund these other two ideas. Okay. And so started talking about writing a book. In these forwards, they're not really going to go in depth about how much went into that. There was much discussion, Dr. Bob is way more of a keep it very simple. They say if it had been up to Dr. Bob, we might not have gotten out of Akron. You know, he was that concerned. If it had been up to Bill, we might have had AA franchises. Thank God the two of them together shield each other out, and hand to God at work. And so what we have is what we have. One super ambitious hustler guy, another really conservative, you moving too fast guy. And so that counteracted. And so we have what we have today. And it has not always been just this smooth sailing kind of deal, but that kind of dynamic tension between the co-founder. And Bill Wilson, when Dr. Bob died in 1950, said they had never had a crossword between them. So even though they had different approaches, they didn't have differences between them. And so they said, okay, we'll do the book then. A lot of stuff went into that. Lot of discussion, discourse, how we're going to publish that, where we're going to get the money. A lot of stuff went into that. So they said, we're going to place this unique experience before the world. Arvis came up and said something, which really, we don't know. Arvis said, well, maybe they were just sharing war stories. Maybe this, well, A, we weren't there, and B, they had a lot of religious stuff they were reading at the time, a lot of guidance they were getting. But like David said, we weren't flies on the wall. What we have, Arvis, that's the flying blind period, what Arvis was describing. This meetings at different places, different stuff being conveyed. By the time Ryan leaves the meeting, and Ryan might leave, Jerry might leave, and Pamela might leave the same meeting, and they be a different. And if you listen to them, you might think 3 different meetings had taken place if you would listen to what was important. Somebody might have came out and said, the most important thing was showing up at the meeting. Somebody else might have said, the most important thing was us saying the Lord's Prayer. And then somebody else might have said, the most important. So, and so now that's the flying blind period. We don't have anything that is replicatable, that is something that we can say, this is what we do all the time. And so now, so that's flying blind. So now we say we're going to have this this book that's going to address that. So in the spring of 1939, our book got published. Membership had reached about 100 men and women. This fledgling, the new society, hadn't had a name. They were called the Drunk Squad in the Oxford group of drunks in the Oxford group, Alcohol Squad in the Oxford group, but there was no name for Alcoholics Anonymous. And so they had various names bandied about for 100 men, but then there was a woman in it, so they couldn't do that. The Way Out, which was a popular one. Somebody went to the Library of Congress and researched how many books there were that already had that name. Turned out 100 Men would have been the 13th book. Just, I ain't in it, but the superstitious aspect, didn't want to be the 13th. So not going to be The Way Out, not going to be 100 Men, So there were a lot of ideas bandied about. And somebody in the meeting, I've heard various things about how that came about. Somebody said a guy suggested it that didn't even stay sober. I don't know. But from the book itself is what the society. So we had a name for the book before we had a name for the fellowship. Very interesting. And the fellowship got its name from the name of the book. And so that period that Arvis alluded to, this? What were they talking about in meetings? And how are they going to transmit that? And somebody, Carl, is going to leave here and go to Detroit and start a meeting. What's he going to say is it that we do here? And somebody is already going out to Toledo. Somebody's going out to, Philadelphia and Dallas. And what are they saying at these? And it's totally up to whoever was going. Can you imagine us sending out these 5, each one of us going out and saying what takes place here? And then what's the most important aspects? So that's the flying blind period, relying on these messengers, but really no coherent, consistent message. And that's what it means by flying blind. And that ended when we had the book published. Reader?
With the appearance of the new book, a great deal began to happen. Dr. Harry Emerson Fosdick, the noted clergyman, reviewed it with approval. In the fall of 1939, Fullerton Ausler, then the editor of the Liberty, printed a piece in his magazine called Alcoholics and God. This brought a rush of 800 frantic inquiries into the little New York office, which meanwhile had been established. Each inquiry was painstakingly answered. Pamphlets and booklets were sent out. Businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers. New groups started up, and it was found, to the astonishment of everyone, that AA's message could be transmitted in the mail as well as by word of mouth. By the end of 1939, it was estimated that 800 alcoholics were on their way to recovery.
Reggie
White, alcoholic. And just kind of like alluding to some of the things you talked about, Ralph, and he talked about before. Like where they got the name of Alcoholics Anonymous, they got it, like Ralph said, but in Akron, the Oxford group was extremely Lutheran, right? And they were going through it was a really religious thing that they were really going through there with the alcoholics. And that drove away the Catholics because they wanted to convert the Catholics. And Clarence Snyder, that's why he broke off and took that group to Cleveland. And they are the ones who took the name Alcoholics Anonymous from the book. And when they took that name, they actually started working the steps as outlined in the big book. And for the first time, that's why it was no longer flying blind. They actually started working the program of recovery that Bill outlined. They were the first group doing that and started sending people out everywhere with that. And that's when the explosion started. Anyway, just wanted to add that part.
Zena?
My name is Zena and I'm an alcoholic. It's such a trip. This paragraph begins with the appearance of this new book. And I'm not a good student. I've never been a good, like before drugs and alcohol, I was not a good student. I didn't like school. I didn't like books. And any book that I read, I would start at chapter 1. It wasn't until I got to Alcoholics Anonymous and started working the steps that I even was aware of the purpose of a preface, of the forwards, of an epilogue. I didn't understand the value of those things. And it's such a trip because here, my sobriety date 9/2/88, here, 35 plus years later, it's painstaking to go through this preliminary historical information. Because me and my ego think, okay, yeah, I know that part. Yeah, I get it. Yeah, can we just get to going? But I can't tell you how valuable it was to discover after the blank page, a single page that talks about the other books that were read and studied before this book was created, and how that served me on 9/2/88, and how, had that not happened, that on 9/2/88 I could have been in the insane asylum instead of in a detox unit. And so here in this forward, I understand the community of Alcoholics Anonymous during the early, just after the flying blind period. It's a trip. The preface of a book shares with me the intention of the book, so I understand how to read it, so that I understand what to look for, so that I have a clue before I even get to chapter 1 of the reason I cracked this book open in the first place, above and beyond the well-whooped ass that I had that got me to the rooms and you people. And then the forwards gives me an idea of what the authors were thinking about when the book was originally written. And the reason why we have 4 forwards is because there were 4 updated editions. And what I'm learning is that in the community that I call home, in the community that saved my ass, in the community that I refer people to, I get to explain the community of that community, where it came from, why it exists, how it can help, how it's still serving me in 2024, even though it was written back in 1930, 35, 39, 37. None of that even really matters to me, who is not a good student. But for the newcomer who is struggling with having to participate in this historical evaluation, don't let it go above your head that a foundation is being set that will carry you from now to the day they lay you down. And on that day, I've been to many funerals in my 35 years of sobriety. On that day, there are so many people where the forwards of this information, the historical value of this information, is why there are great things spoken about people who are laid across in the front. So please don't let it don't be amiss that we start at the historical base. Stay close, pay attention, and don't trip if you don't understand. It will get clearer when we get to step 1, because we are not quite there yet. Okay, thank you for letting me share.
Wow, thank you, Zena. Thank you. Lydia?
Lydia, alcoholic. Thanks, Ralph. I remember when I started reading the forwards, and the history on me was not lost. I'm looking at the growth of AA and how it started to grow from the first 100 men and women, right, back in 1937. Now I'm at the end of 1939, and what? There is 800 who have recovered. And it's also interesting for me to see how the message was being carried, right? We have influential people in the newspaper, clergymen. We start seeing how word of mouth also from influential people took stock. It took some stock into the people that were inquiring about AA. And that also was important to me and is important to me. So, I tend to take stock in what, somebody of influence would say to me today, depending on the source, right? So I'm looking at clergymen who have people in their church that's being addressed to and discussed with, right? I'm a person of faith. So when I'm in church, right, to have my pastor talk about this newfound movement, I'm going to take stock in that. Newspaper articles. I'm going to listen. I'm going to pay attention, and then I'm going to see the growth of AA. And that's what I love about the forwards, because it just continuously shows me how AA developed and how it grew. Thank you for letting me share.
Wow. Really, really observant. Thank you so much, Lydia. The folk who helped us out, and Lydia pointed out the ones that were just shown in this paragraph. No more hands after D. Jared?
Good morning, everybody. So I had two things that popped up I was wondering about. When it says businessmen traveling out of existing groups were referred to these prospective newcomers, is that sort of a hint at sponsorship? And one other question I had, where in our traditions it says to remain anonymous at the levels of press, radio, and film, but it seems to be that there was some in that magazine. Would that be considered press, or was this written before the traditions? And that
Answer those two questions, really. So when we say personal anonymity, that's what it means. We definitely wanted press. Our fellowship per se did not need anonymity. We needed the newspaper. We needed word from ministers and clergy. So that key word is personal anonymity at the level of press, not Alcoholics Anonymous as a brand new, wait a minute, some people got an answer. We welcome that. In fact, it talks about the articles. Great question. In terms of, was that a precursor to sponsorship? When it said these new inquiries went out, no, that was a precursor to our central offices. We had, when people called and said, I got a problem, we had nobody to respond. We needed some people. We didn't have a hotline. We didn't have the helpline. We didn't have the H&I. We didn't have any of that. So no, that was how we responded. And we tried to respond, to any and every inquiry. Fran?
Yeah. Hey everybody, Fran Alcoholic. I just wanted to say something funny that I had heard about the name of the big book. Besides it being called The Way Out, and then came the Dawn, and the drunk from the Sane Asylum come up with the name Alcoholics Anonymous. The reason why they call it the big book, I thought that was hysterical because of the fact that they had asked the printer to come up with the thickest paper that they could find. And that's how the name Big Book came about. So I just thought that was hilarious whenever I go through the history of the Big Book. And thanks for my scribe.
And they wanted them to come up with the thickest paper because they wanted the book to seem physically imposing so that people would feel like they were getting bang for their buck. Did not know this book would be a seller like it is now. In fact, it was not a bestseller initially. Ronnie?
You must have been thinking about me sharing, because you led into what I was going to say. A lot of good comments on the paragraph in terms of pointing out our growth. When Bill's excitement and Hank Parkhurst and all of their excitement about when this book came out, they knew it was going to be flying off the shelves, because after all, they had found a cure for alcoholism, right? They just knew they were going to have all these inquiries and stuff. So they go to the post office after all this comes out, and they go to the post office box and they look in it, and it's only a couple of cards that are returned in there, and they think, well, there must be there's not enough room in the post office box to fit all the inquiries. So they must have some big bags in the back full of our stuff, right? And they go in the back, they ask the postman, where are our stuff? Where are our inquiries? And that was all they had gotten back. That nobody was responding to this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I think about that age of no social media, no way of spreading the word worldwide, other than the methods that we've talked about in here, magazines that they had at the time, and we weren't the ones writing the magazines. It's amazing how the two people they mentioned in the paragraph, Fulton Osler and Harry Emerson Fosdick, clergymen, who were considered, I guess at that time, the most credible people that you could have, the religious people who endorsed our fellowship, who really
help people know this wasn't a flim-flam thing that these drunks were trying to pull on us, because imagine us with our reputations, right, writing something about, this book that has the name of no well-named author or anything on it, and it's professing to have something about a cure for alcoholism. Who would believe that? And it took these clergy saying that they endorsed it in order for people in this article about alcoholics and God, for people to start responding to it. Now, thank God for the outside individuals who were able to show their backing of this movement that these people have found. Without them, Alcoholics Anonymous would not be what it is today. That's all I got, Ralph.
So the book got published in 1939. It's interesting, its publication. It had some stops and starts. And when Bill Wilson started writing the book in 1937, they went out hustling, trying to get some people to back them. So stocks, a bunch of stuff which we could talk about at some. But at any rate, at one point, they thought, and one of the guys that was very instrumental in the writing of the book was this guy, Hank Parkhurst. And he was like Bill Wilson's right hand at that time. And they thought that they had gotten Reader's Digest to buy off on it. They thought Reader's Digest had said, get us enough, get us in advance, we're going to front you some money for this book, right? And so Bill Wilson gets these chapters together, and when he has enough chapters and enough he thinks to put in front of Reader's Digest, they go to Reader's Digest maybe half a year later or something, and they go to the guy, and the guy barely remembers, and he's like, I didn't have the authority, and my people, they didn't sign off on it. Crushed. Didn't have no money to finish the book. Had a guy in the fellowship named Bertha Taylor who fronted some money. Anyway, the book ended up getting written, fits and starts. And they thought any problems we had pre-publication will be answered after the book is published. Because after all, think of how many millions of drunks there are, right? And now we have the first cure, in quotes, for this problem. They weren't calling it a disease per se, but everybody knows, all these drunks, this alcoholism problem. Look at Prohibition after all. Look at how many people used to march. So it's a gang of people concerned with this, right? So they were thinking, when the book gets published, we have all these postcards that are going out with the books. And we know we're going to have all these people saying, send me a book, send me a book, send me. I want the book, I want the book. And they have 4 postcards returned that first day. Ronnie already described to you what happened. They thought that can't be true. Look, no. Oh, are you serious with me right now? And so and anyway, what ended up accelerating the acceptance of the book and the widespread spread of the book were our friends in medicine, in the clergy, and in the media. So we talked about, and I'm hopeful. Zena, thank you so much for what you said. So we try to be mindful and not make it overbearing to you guys, this new that have not been familiar with our history. But to me, it is super interesting. And I hope it's being presented in a way that you find interesting. I want to ask, especially anybody that's new, any questions or any confusion, put it in the chat, okay? Because we don't know whether or not some of this is digestible, you know what I'm saying? And it to me is fascinating, knowing where I come from. And it was a lot of drama. I know y'all like drama. We know you knew. It was a lot of drama, you guys. People was falling out with each other. People were arguing with Bill. We don't want you to be doing this, and so it was a lot of stuff going on. And so when the book got written, they were tripping. They were like, "Shit, don't nobody want to see this." But then, bam, this dude Fulton Orsler in the 40s, you guys, Life magazine, Liberty magazine, Time magazine. It's a lot of youngsters because even later, some of us old people remember when magazines were big. Newsweek, Time, these magazines before social media, before TV blew up, these magazines were big. And so Liberty magazine, that was big. And so when he published his piece, it went out to a lot of people, you guys. It went out to a lot of people. It's like, these days, now you would have all of the social media outlets and it would be, but it was very different then. So they discovered a couple of things. One, they started getting people now to respond. The stuff they have been hoping for started happening. We didn't have Central. We had one little office in New York. Ruth Hawk, the secretary, would painstakingly try to answer all the inquiries. So I'm here in Los Angeles. This actually happened too. That's how A started in Los Angeles. Get a postcard, get a letter. Most of the time they would get letters in New York. Heard about this new thing. Heard about it. I'm interested in, I got a cousin, I got a brother, I got a husband, I got a boo. How can I reach you? Okay, ain't got cell phones. Phones ain't like that. Letter writing was big in the 40s, and they were painstakingly right. Somebody asked, was this the beginning of spot? Oh, no. This was the beginning of a lone drunk sitting somewhere that didn't know whether or not his inquiry even made it to anybody. It's not like when I call now to some and they get all these prompts to put you on. You want to know, need a live body. I'm dying, and so they wanted them to know, we hear you. And so then when the traveling salesmen were the biggest advocates, but we didn't know, remember? Until the book was written, the only way the message was transmitted was face-to-face, word of mouth. That's the only way. Now they discovered something brand new. It was found, to the astonishment of everybody, that the message could be transmitted mail as well as word. What? Who knew? Oh my God, this is a game changer. That changed the damn game. We do not have to just wait till Ronnie's ass, who's traveling out of LA, can make it. Maybe he might go to San Diego. Maybe we can transmit this message by mail. By the end of 1939, thank you, Lydia, for pointing it out, we ballooned from 100 to 800. We increased 800%, in a year, in less than a year's time, as a result of the book being published and as a result of us learning something very valuable. That this message could be transmitted, didn't just have to be knee to knee, eye to eye, mouth to ear. It could be transmitted that way. And so that flying blind, the pioneering period ended, and we had something brand new taking place. It was the other important thing out of there, which I meant to say too, in addition to answering the inquiries, the other reason these emissaries went out, the businessmen, again, not for purposes of sponsorship, that's how groups got started. That's how the group in Los Angeles got started. Very interesting story about how it started in Los Angeles. Now, some people left, like to start in Detroit. This guy, Archie, he left the Akron group, went and started Detroit. People would start, but in other cities and states, it was you know, they would do an inquiry, and then some business people or somebody traveling, hopefully, will come out and help get groups started. So that was the main function of the people going out to answer the inquiries and, more importantly, get groups started. I am so glad I got a chance to jump on. Hopefully I can see all the birthdays and some special ones. I'm gonna have to cut my camera off. So Doug, I'll still be on when you're celebrating the birthday. I gotta finish packing. Happy birthday, Alcoholics Anonymous. All of us are collectively sharing in a birthday. This deal in Akron was amazing. Had some other members of the group who showed up. I am so grateful. You know, Lavelle and DeValdis and Bill and Alice and Deborah. I'm so grateful that you guys showed up. Thank you. And
let's get a reader next week.
Oh, I need a lady to read next week. First Lady's hand us. Kathy, you will read next week. Get here a little early. Let Ryan know you're here. Ronnie, I'll let Ronnie mention.